Hello and welcome to the MOOC on Media Laws and Ethics. Today we are going to discuss media regulations in India. The objectives of today's lecture are to understand the constitutional framework of media laws, to understand the background of media regulation in India, and to understand the present state of media regulation in India. As we know, the Constitution of India guarantees 6 fundamental rights: the right to equality, the right to freedom, right against exploitation, right to freedom of religion, cultural and educational rights, and right to constitutional remedies. Each of these rights have certain rights protected under them. The right to freedom under Article 19 protects 6 rights concerning the freedom of speech and expression, assembly, association, movement, residence, and profession. The right to freedom of speech and expression, as in Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution, is considered by many to be the most precious among all the rights that we have. And this is because this right enables us to impart information, receive information, to hold an opinion, and to even dissent against the democratically elected government. There are questions pertaining to the freedom of press being a fundamental right or not, because the freedom of press is not explicitly mentioned in our Constitution. However, the Supreme Court in its decisions or judgments on the matter have clearly explained that the right to freedom of speech and expression, as in Article 19(2), also extends to the press, which means the press also enjoys the same right to freedom of speech and expression like any individual in the country. It can be noted here that though the right to freedom of speech and expression is guaranteed to individuals, it is only through the media that information is disseminated as news, because of which many are of the opinion that the right to freedom of speech and expression is realized only through the media. In the context of democracy, the right to freedom of speech and expression has a very important role, because this freedom also gives the media the right to play a role in the strengthening and continuation of democracy. The media, apart from providing authentic information to the public, also keeps a close eye on the activities of the government so that it fulfills all the promises made to the public. Restrict our right to freedom of speech and expression by using existing laws or by making laws, new laws, in the interest of protecting the sovereignty and integrity of the country, security of the state, for protecting friendly relations with foreign states, or maintaining public order, decency or morality, or in relation to contempt of court, defamation, and incitement to an offense. Many laws have been brought in for regulating the media in the country after the independence. Some of those laws are targeted at regulating the technology related to media, and some are for creating a self-regulatory media environment in the country. At the same time, we can also find laws which have their legacies in the British rule in the country, which are still operational and are used for regulating the media in India. But before we go to the discussion on the use of different laws for regulating different types of media, it is pertinent for us to have a look at the history of media regulation in India, because history not just gives us a glimpse of our past, but it also helps us in understanding our present, and for which we have to go to a period of time when the country was under the rule of the British East India Company. In 1776, William Bowles, an ex-employee of the British East India Company, expressed his intention of starting a newspaper in Calcutta by pasting some posters on the wall of the company's office in Calcutta. However, William Bowles was not just denied the permission to start his newspaper, but rather he was expelled from the country back to England. In 1780, James Augustus Hickey started his newspaper called the Bengal Gazette or the Calcutta General Advertiser, simply known as the Hickey's Gazette. According to American scholar Andrew Otis in his book, The Untold Story of India's First Newspaper, James Augustus Hickey was able to run his newspaper properly for few years, but he entered into a confrontation with the then Governor General of Bengal, Warren Hastings, and because of which James Augustus Hickey's newspaper was denied the service of the postal department of the East India Company, as a result of which Hickey could not distribute his newspapers among his readers spread across the British territories in India, and ultimately he lost out on business and on profit, and he had to close down his newspaper. In 1795, censorship was introduced for the first time in India when Madras Gazette was asked to submit all its materials to the military secretary before publication. In 1799, Lord Wellesley promulgated the Censorship Press Act. It required address of printer, name of publishers and editors to be printed on the newspaper. Pre-censorship by Secretary to the Government of India was made compulsory under this act. In 1823, licensing regulations was introduced by Governor John Adams. These regulations made licensing compulsory for publishing all matters except those which were commercial in nature. In 1835, licensing was abolished and was replaced by the Press Act. This act was also known as the Metcalfe's Act. According to this act, only the declaration of the address of the printer and the publication was required. In 1857, in response to the Sepoy Mutiny or the First War of Independence or the Great Revolt of 1857, licensing was reintroduced by Lord Canning. Licensing was made mandatory for books and any other kind of publications. In 1860, the Comprehensive Law, Indian Penal Code or the IPC was enacted. The IPC contained offences like defamation, obscenity, which the media have to avoid. The IPC is still operational. In 1867, Press and Registration of Books Act was introduced, and this act is still operational. This act relaxed the restrictions placed by the Press Act. It mandated publishing prominently the names of the owner and the editor along with the date of publication. In 1878, the Vernacular Press Act was brought in by the then Viceroy, Lord Lytton. This act empowered the government to issue search warrant to enter premises without any court order. This act was specifically targeted at Indian language newspapers, as the Indian language newspapers were giving voice to the rising dissent against British administration in India. There was all-round condemnation of this law, and finally this law had to be repealed in 1881. In 1908, the Newspapers Incitement of Offences Act was introduced. This act empowered magistrates to seize a newspaper printing press for inciting murder or any violence. In 1910, Indian Press Act was brought in. This act was like a revisit to the Vernacular Press Act. It empowered the government to ask for security deposit from newspapers and forfeit it wherever it deemed fit. In 1923, the Official Secrets Act was introduced. This act prohibited publication of classified information by any publications. In 1947, India attained its independence from the British rule. On 26 November 1949, the country got a new constitution when the Constituent Assembly adopted the constitution. The first press commission was set up in 1952 by the government. The commission submitted its report in 1954. Among the many suggestions given by the commission was the setting up a Press Council of India. In 1955, the Working Journalists and Other Newspaper Conditions of Service and Miscellaneous Provisions Act was brought in. In 1958, the Working Journalist Fixation of Rates of Wages Act was brought in, which resulted in the formation of wage commissions for journalists later on. In 1956, the Parliamentary Proceedings Protection of Publication Act was brought in. This act was however repealed during the emergency in 1975-76. In 1965, the Press Council of India Act was passed in the Parliament. The Press Council of India was set up the following year. In 1976, the Prevention of Publication of Objectionable Matter Act was brought in. However, it was repealed in 1977 after the emergency. The press freedom was suspended during emergencies imposed in 1962, 1971, which were of course due to wars with Pakistan. And in 1975 and 1976, it was an internal emergency, and under the provisions of Article 352, press freedom was suspended in India. During the emergency of 1975-76, the Press Council of India was withdrawn and Press Council of India was suspended. In 1978, after emergency, a new government was formed and the Press Council of India Act was passed in the Parliament again, and the Press Council of India was restored. In the same year, the Second Press Commission was set up in the face of new challenges to the press. This commission submitted its report in 1982. Now we will look at the Indian Penal Code or the IPC. There are many sections in the IPC which are important from the perspective of media regulation in India. So let's look at some of them. Deals with sedition, which was added in 1870. Sedition, according to this section, pertains to inciting people to rebel against the authority of the state. The punishment for sedition is imprisonment, which may be for life term. Whereas section 153A deals with promoting enmity between groups on grounds of religion, race, language, residence, etc., which was added in 1898. The punishment of this offence is imprisonment, which may extend to 5 years with fine. Section 153B deals with assertions against national integration and was added in 1927. Assertions against national integration may be either spoken or written words, or by signs or by visible representation. The punishment for this offence is imprisonment, which may extend up to 5 years with fine. Section 292 defines obscenity in media. Section 293 prescribes punishment for obscenity. This punishment is for selling, letting, to hire, distributing, exhibiting or circulating to any person under the age of 20 years any such obscene object as is referred to in section 292 of IPC, or offers or attempts to do so. The punishment for this offence may range from 5 to 7 years of imprisonment with fine. Section 295A deals with outraging religious feelings, which was added in 1927. The punishment for this offence is imprisonment for a term which may extend to 3 years. Till now, we got a brief glimpse of the history of media regulation in India and also saw how the laws and regulations brought in during the colonial period still have relevance in regulating media in India. We specifically saw few sections of IPC related to media regulation. Thus, we can say that it is important to understand history of media regulation in order to understand media regulations currently prevailing in the country.